Jason walks through the city with a clear purpose. He's a young black lawyer known for his strong commitment to justice and his ability to speak up for those who often get overlooked. In the city, Jason stands out not just because he's good at what he does, but also because he truly cares about making a difference. The city is a place of big contrasts. Tall buildings in busy corporate areas are just a few blocks away from poorer neighborhoods where many people struggle. This city has both rich and poor living close to each other, yet their worlds are worlds apart. Jason sees this every day and it drives him to work harder. As Jason moves through the city, he feels the weight of his responsibilities. He knows that many people look up to him as a source of hope. His job is more than just going to court. It's about fighting for fairness. With every step he takes on the city's busy streets, he's focused on breaking down the barriers that keep people from living equally. This city, with all its energy and challenges, is where Jason tries to make a difference every day. In the busy offices where Jason works as a young black lawyer, he is suddenly called into his boss's office. There he is given a file that changes everything for him. This file is about a very big and sensitive case. A white police officer, Officer Daniels, is accused of shooting a black teenager, Michael Thomas, which many believe was unjust. The shooting was caught on video by someone who was there and has caused a lot of anger and protests in the city. The city is already a place with a lot of differences between rich and poor and different races, and this shooting has made things worse. People are very upset and are demonstrating in the streets, demanding that the police be held responsible for their actions and that things need to change. Jason knows that working on this case is very important, but also very risky. Some of his workmates, who are mostly white, are worried about what could happen because of the case. They think it could cause them problems at work or make people view them differently. But Jason is known for fighting for what's right and wants to help make things better. As Jason starts to work on the case, he finds out that there are many different stories about what happened the night Michael was shot. Officer Daniels says he thought Michael was going to attack him because it looked like he had a gun, but it turned out to be just a cell phone. But other people say that Michael was a good kid who would never hurt anyone, and that he didn't deserve to be shot. With everyone in the city paying attention, Jason feels a lot of pressure to find out the real story and make sure justice is done. He knows that what he does could help change how police and the community interact in the future. He wants to make sure the truth comes out and that something good comes from this sad event. As the trial date approached, Jason found himself submerged in a sea of paperwork and legal documents. The atmosphere in the city was charged, with every newspaper headline and TV news ticker echoing the public's outcry over the case. It wasn't just another court case. For many, it symbolized a battle against a long history of racial injustice. As a young black attorney at the forefront, Jason felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. The office of Jason's law firm buzzed with a nervous energy. While his colleagues recognized the importance of the case, there was a palpable sense of apprehension about the repercussions of challenging a white police officer's actions so publicly. Jason's inbox was flooded with emails from various departments within the firm advising caution, reminding him of the political and social backlash that could ensue. Some emails were supportive, others ominously warning. This was not just a legal battleground, but a minefield of potential career-ending moves. Despite the internal warnings, Jason's commitment did not waver. His desk was strewn with witness statements, forensic reports, and the officer's personnel files. Each piece of evidence seemed to tell a part of a story, but the narrative was incomplete. It was during one late evening, while reviewing security footage frame by frame, that Jason noticed an anomaly in the sequence of events as described by the officer. This piece of evidence contradicted the statement that the officer had given immediately after the shooting. It was a small detail, but Jason knew the significance it could hold in court. Armed with this new information, Jason approached his mentor and senior partner, Mrs. Hammond, to discuss the implications. Mrs. Hammond was a seasoned lawyer, known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense approach. In her office, surrounded by the legal tomes of decades of practice, Jason laid out his findings. Mrs. Hammond listened intently, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and serious. "Jason, this evidence could indeed turn the tide in our favor. but you must be prepared for the storm that will follow. The police union will not take this lightly, and the media will have a field day. Are you ready for that kind of heat? Jason's resolve hardened. I'm ready. This isn't just about one case. It's about setting a precedent, about justice for Michael and for every young black person who feels unprotected by the system supposed to defend them. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Jason met with forensic experts to validate his findings and worked with his legal team to integrate the new evidence into their strategy. Every step was taken with meticulous care, aware that the opposition would scrutinize their case with a fine-tooth comb. Meanwhile, the reaction from the police union was swift and fierce. They issued a statement condemning what they described as a witch hunt against a decorated officer. Threatening emails began to arrive, not just to Jason but to his firm as well. Some called for him to be disbarred. Others were more ominously vague, speaking of consequences for his future. At home, the case took a personal toll. Jason's family watched with concern as he grew more absorbed and, at times, distant. His wife, Angela, supported him wholeheartedly, but she couldn't ignore the strain it put on their family. Their conversations increasingly revolved around the case, about the threats, and about whether standing up like this was worth the personal risk. One evening, as Jason recounted yet another threatening message he'd received, Angela reached for his hand, her voice tinged with worry. "Just promise me you'll be careful, Jason. I support you, but it scares me to think of what could happen." Jason looked into Angela's eyes, his own reflecting the turmoil he felt. "I promise," he said, but the assurance sounded hollow even to his own ears. The community support, however, bolstered his spirits. Letters and messages poured in from across the country, from people of all races who saw in Jason's fight a fragment of their own battles. A local community leader, Pastor Williams, organized a rally in support where hundreds gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for Michael" and "Stand with Jason." It was at this rally, speaking to the crowd of hopeful, determined faces, that Jason felt the full impact of his role. He was not just a lawyer, he was a beacon for a cause much greater than himself. The night before the trial, Jason stood alone in his office, overlooking the city skyline. The office was quiet, the usual hustle of his colleagues gone. He reviewed his opening statement, practicing each line with a level of precision that left no room for doubt. As he polished each word, he knew that tomorrow everything would change. He was ready to fight not just for Michael, but for every unheard voice waiting for justice. Jason's journey through the rising action of the trial was not just a professional endeavor, but a profound personal and communal struggle against a backdrop of systemic injustice. With each development, he navigated not only the legal challenges, but also the broader implications of his fight for racial equality. Climax. The courthouse was a fortress on the day the trial began, surrounded by barricades and police officers. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation as Jason prepared to present his case. The courtroom was packed, with every seat filled and additional onlookers standing at the back. Reporters filled their notebooks, their pens ready to capture the unfolding drama. As the judge called the court to order, Jason took a deep breath, his files neatly arranged in front of him. He knew the eyes of the city, and indeed the nation, were on him. This was more than just a trial. It was a public litmus test for justice in a society grappling with racial tensions. The prosecution presented their case first, portraying Officer Daniels as a dedicated servant of the city who acted in self-defense during a dangerous confrontation. Their narrative was polished, crafted to resonate with fears about crime and safety. They displayed images of the officer's commendations and testimonies from colleagues who praised his integrity and professionalism. Then it was Jason's turn. He rose, his presence commanding the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice clear and resonant. "We are here not just to talk about a split-second decision in the dark, but to illuminate the truth about a pattern of behavior that cost a young man his life." Jason methodically dismantled the prosecution's narrative. He introduced the security footage he had uncovered, which showed a different sequence of events than what Officer Daniels had reported. Frame by frame, he pointed out discrepancies, his tone steady but forceful. "Here we see Michael, clearly unarmed, posing no immediate threat. And here we see the officer's response, not a reaction to danger, but an escalation to lethal force. The courtroom was silent, the jury and spectators hanging on every word. Jason then brought in a forensic expert who testified that the angle and range of the shot suggested it was not defensive. The evidence, Jason declared, tells a story of preemptive violence, not self-defense. Outside, the atmosphere was electric. Supporters of Michael Thomas gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for Michael" and "Truth will prevail." The crowd grew as the day went on, chants echoing off the courthouse walls. Opposite them, a smaller, more hostile group waved banners in support of Officer Daniels, their angry shouts clashing with the calls for justice. As tensions rose, police in riot gear lined the steps of the courthouse, a stark symbol of the city's divide. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of the swelling crowds. Back inside, the defense tried to counter, questioning the credibility of Jason's evidence and the motives of his witnesses. But Jason was unyielding. He brought to the stand a witness from the neighborhood who had seen the shooting. The witness, a middle-aged black woman, spoke powerfully about her experience, her voice breaking as she recounted the fear and helplessness she felt that night. Jason concluded his presentation with a compelling closing argument. "We have a duty," he implored the jury, "to look beyond the uniform and see the actions, to weigh them against the laws of our land and the moral laws of our conscience. Michael Thomas deserves that from us." As the jury retired to deliberate, the energy inside and outside the courthouse was palpable. Jason felt a mix of exhaustion and adrenaline. He had done everything he could to present a strong case, but the outcome was now out of his hands. The community vigil began as the sun set, candles flickering in the growing dusk. Speeches were made, prayers were offered, and songs of hope filled the air. The scene was poignant, a community united in their demand for justice, whatever the verdict might be. Inside his quiet, empty office, Jason watched the live feeds on his computer, reflecting on the enormity of what was at stake, not just for him or for Michael's family, but for the entire city. This trial, regardless of its outcome, had exposed raw wounds and ignited a critical conversation about race, justice, and accountability. Jason knew that his fight, irrespective of the jury's decision, was far from over. It was just another chapter in a long history of struggle, and he was ready to keep pushing forward, fueled by the belief that justice, true justice, was something worth fighting for, no matter the odds. The courthouse was quieter now, the halls echoing softly as the jury retreated to deliberate. Outside, the crowds remained, their murmurs and occasional chants a constant background noise to the tense waiting game that unfolded within. Inside, Jason sat in the near-empty courtroom, reviewing his notes and replaying the trial's pivotal moments in his mind. His face showed the strain of sleepless nights and relentless pressure, but his eyes were resolute, focused on the greater goal. As hours turned into days, the weight of public and media scrutiny intensified. News outlets camped outside the courthouse provided continuous coverage, speculating on the possible outcomes and analyzing every aspect of the trial. Will justice be served? Was the question that everyone seemed to be asking, and Jason found himself at the center of this national dialogue, his every move watched and dissected. Back at his law firm, the atmosphere was fraught with tension. Some colleagues who had initially supported Jason's decision to take the case were now distancing themselves, wary of the firm's reputation amidst such a controversial trial. Whispers in the corridors spoke of lost clients and potential financial fallout. During a tense meeting with the partners, one commented sharply, "You've put us all on the line, Jason. This better be worth it." The lack of support was disheartening, but Jason remained steadfast, driven by his commitment to justice. At home, the strain was evident too. Angela noticed the change in Jason, the long hours, the constant stress, the rare smiles. She did her best to provide comfort, preparing his favorite meals, listening to his doubts and fears, and offering words of encouragement. Yet the gulf between them seemed to widen, filled with unspoken worries and the chilling threats that arrived almost daily now. One evening, as Jason arrived home, he found Angela poring over a series of threatening letters that had been left at their doorstep. "This has to stop," she said, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "They're not just targeting you anymore. They're targeting our family." The letters were explicit, warning Jason of dire consequences if he continued to pursue justice for Michael Thomas. That night, the reality of the situation settled heavily on Jason's shoulders, not just as a lawyer, but as a husband and a father. Despite the threats, the community support remained strong. Rallies and vigils continued, with people from all walks of life coming together to stand by Jason in the quest for justice. Pastor Williams, who had become a staunch ally, organized community meetings to discuss the broader implications of the case and to ensure that whatever the outcome, the momentum for change would not wane. As the jury's deliberation dragged on, Jason was called to a heated exchange with Officer Daniels' lead attorney outside the courtroom. The attorney accused Jason of turning a straightforward self-defense case into a racial spectacle. "You're playing with fire and you're going to get burned," he hissed. Jason's response was calm but firm. "This isn't about playing games. It's about righting a wrong, something you seem to have forgotten." Each day of waiting brought new challenges. The media's scrutiny became more invasive, and the personal attacks more pointed. Jason found solace in brief, quiet moments, often in the early morning hours before the courthouse stirred to life. He would sit in his office, a cup of coffee in hand, and reflect on the journey that had brought him here. It was during these moments that the enormity of his task became most clear, as did his resolve to see it through. Finally, the moment arrived. The jury signaled they had reached a verdict. As Jason walked back into the courtroom, his heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The gallery was packed, a hushed silence descending as everyone awaited the announcement. Angela was there in the front row, her hand clasped in Pastor Williams, both offering him reassuring smiles. Jason stood, his gaze fixed on the jury as they filed in. He knew that their decision would not just determine his client's fate, but could also ignite significant changes in the city and beyond. Regardless of the verdict, Jason understood that his fight for justice was far from over. It was a path fraught with personal and professional perils, but one that he had chosen knowingly and one he would walk again if needed. His commitment to justice was unshakable, forged in the fire of adversity and the collective hope of a community yearning for change. As the courtroom hush descended, the jury foreman stood, a slip of paper in hand that held the weight of countless hopes and fears. The room's air felt thick as Jason watched, his heart drumming a relentless beat. "In the case of the state versus Officer Daniels," the foreman began, his voice steady, "we find the defendant—" There was a pause, a breath held collectively. "Guilty of manslaughter." The words rippled through the courtroom, sparking an array of reactions. Some spectators gasped, others wept softly, and a few clapped quietly. Outside, the crowd that had gathered erupted into cheers and cries, a tumultuous wave of relief and vindication washing over them. Officer Daniels was led away, his head bowed as his family consoled each other in hushed, broken whispers. For the community, the verdict was a beacon of hope, a sign that justice, though imperfect and fraught with challenges, was achievable. For the police force, it was a wake-up call, prompting internal reviews and discussions about training and engagement policies with the community they swore to protect. Jason stood amidst the swirl of emotions, feeling a complex mix of relief, exhaustion, and a sobering clarity. The verdict was a victory, yes, but it was just one step on a long road toward systemic change. As the courtroom slowly emptied, he remained seated, lost in thought, reflecting on the impact of the case. It had exposed deep-seated biases and flaws within the justice system, and while the verdict was right, it had come at a significant personal and professional cost. In the quiet aftermath, Jason considered his future. The case had drained him, yet it had also reignited his passion for advocacy and reform. The fight for justice was far from over. Systemic change required persistent effort, and Jason felt more committed than ever to be at the forefront of this fight. The community's response to the verdict showed a collective yearning for fairness and accountability, and Jason knew he had a crucial role to play. As he finally stood to leave, his gaze fell on the empty defendant's chair, a stark reminder of the trial's stakes. He thought about Michael, the young life lost and the family left to grieve. Their faces marked with sorrow but also gratitude towards him were etched into his memory. They had trusted him to bring their son's case to light, and he had shouldered that trust with an acute sense of duty. Walking out of the courthouse, Jason felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders anew. The battle was won, but the war against injustice lingered. He was ready to face it, armed with knowledge, experience, and a renewed sense of purpose. As the courthouse doors closed behind him, the sounds of the city reached his ears. The chants, the honks, the distant sirens, a city alive with the complexities of human life and justice. In the days that followed, Jason began outlining plans for a series of community workshops on legal rights and police accountability. He also reached out to colleagues across the country to form a coalition aimed at legal reforms. His path was clear, his resolve firm. Justice was not just a verdict, but a continuous pursuit, and Jason was determined to lead the charge.